Yeah, so I think last time we did last time we had a chat similar to this. We actually took up a lot of questions from the guys who joined in. So before we start, if you've got a question anytime, just drop one, and we'll just talk about RabbitMQ. Yeah. And I guess for a start, just some intros on my side. As Robert said, Ayanda Dube. I've been working with Erlang Solutions for quite some years now, but recently joined 8x8. I've been working with RabbitMQ for I think about 5 years. Doing a lot of consulting, feature development, and also worked with Pivotal for quite a bit. That's pretty much it on my side. And and we've got Karl, who's part of the core team. And Karl, quick intro.
Yeah, I'm Karl. I'm part of the core team of RabbitMQ that develops RabbitMQ. I've been working on that for nearly 6 years now. Heavily involved with some of the newer features, core MQ, streams, that type of thing. So, but should be able to answer questions on pretty much anything, hopefully.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't know if I think it's not very easy to get feedback from people, but I know there's people like Robert here who haven't worked with RabbitMQ that much. So maybe just as a start, what is RabbitMQ? Karl, I don't know. Can you, in a few sentences, what is Rabbit?
The shortest explanation is RabbitMQ is a message broker. Sit in your infrastructure and broker messages between your applications. It's been around for a fairly long time now, good 15 years probably, and is quite heavily used to connect stuff and more. So you want to add anything, Ayanda?
I think just one question which I once received from some users. They're like, why was it named RabbitMQ, right? And I was like, oh, cool, that's a good question. So I had to dig up context of I think it's actually the founding CEO of Rabbit Technologies back in 2007. And I was like, I dropped him a message. I'm like, oh, hi, it's Ayanda here from ESL. I just wanted to know, why did you name the product RabbitMQ? It's like, oh, because rabbits are cute and they're fast, and basically that's a bit of history on the name, right? So and at the time, you can find this info on Wikipedia. The MQP specification had been defined, right, by companies like Cisco and JP Morgan, and RabbitMQ basically came out from that, being an Erlang implementation of the MQP spec. So and ever since, it's been evolving for I think Karl mentioned 15 years now, right? That's quite a while. Yeah. And I don't know, Karl, prior to joining Pivotal and VMware, did you play around with RabbitMQ, like from previous experience?
Yeah, we used my previous place that I worked for. We used RabbitMQ quite heavily. Does anyone have any questions or topics that you want us to cover? Because this is completely open and interactive.
Yeah.
Just raise a hand or speak.
Well, if there's no questions, I've got a question for you, Karl.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so Erlang, RabbitMQ on the Beam, running on the Beam. Do you think that's in terms of the technology of choice for the core? What are your thoughts on that? Could it have been written in something else, like, I don't know, .NET or something?
Probably not back in the day, but of course you could write anything in anything, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's and I can't answer for what the founders of RabbitMQ were thinking when they thought it they thought to choose Erlang for their product. But there is a synergy, or a, you know, with the message passing model and passing messages around. So it kind of makes a certain amount of sense, as well as the concurrency model in Erlang being one that maps quite directly to the kind of objects that you might have in a message broker, like queues or other kind of agents that do the work, connections, that kind of thing. So I can only guess that they felt that there was a pretty safe bet, as well as the maturity of Erlang itself. Would you choose it today? That would be a quite interesting question. If you're going to write a new message broker. I mean, a message broker written from scratch today might not look like a traditional message broker necessarily. It might be, you know, have a completely different kind of architecture. Maybe we'll leverage something like the various deployment infrastructure options that, you know, are now kind of becoming a lot more common. You might leverage infrastructure that you kind of assume people have available. Is Erlang the fastest option to write a data service in? No, it's not. There are things, there's overhead in the model itself. Is it very good at concurrency, which you need? Yes, it is. So you kind of, you know, when you write stuff in Erlang, you're always operating at a very high level, right? It's very hard to sort of drop down further down the stack and optimize things there. You're kind of relying on the OTP team doing that for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Which they do a very good job of. So Rabbit's just getting better as Erlang is getting better without us even doing any work.
I mean, I remember just after the announcement of the JIT, some performance tests which were done by the guys at Ericsson. They actually used RabbitMQ, and I mean, the performance literally just shot up quite significantly. So no, that's cool. That's cool. And in terms of, I mean, I've played around with RabbitMQ, and you know, seen a lot in terms of the code base, and there's so many cool things that are in there, which I feel like you guys should be like maybe you know, a bit sharing some of those libraries a bit more. I don't know, announcing them maybe more on the mailing list, for example. And and people are like totally clueless that there's things like that in Rabbit. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess over the last few years, we've been trying to make smaller, more generic libraries that don't just benefit RabbitMQ, but also benefit, you know, the Erlang community, Erlang and Elixir community, really, and anyone running on the Beam, really. Yeah. So I think the first one we kind of started off with was the RA library to implement Raft, which we used to implement our quorum queue type with. To implement RA, which is quite a complex undertaking, we needed a couple of other libraries. We got the Aten failure detector, which is quite good for kind of detecting likely network partition scenarios, so that you can kind of start poking around and maybe take the appropriate action. There's also, and I think this one is quite an not underused, but underappreciated library, but it's very small. It's the Gen batch server, it's called. It's just like a Gen server, but that does the batching for you. So your interface, the behavior you implement, will take a list of messages, and then you do some processing on these messages. And whilst you do that, you let the Erlang mailbox build up the next batch of messages. So it does batching for you, and we use it quite heavily. It's used inside RA in order to batch writes to the write-ahead log. So it's very, very useful for kind of sync type of kind of use cases. We use it. It's kind of like a central core component of Osiris. It's another library that we do that implements the streams, that's sort of the replicated log kind of data structure that we that is new in RabbitMQ 3.9. Basically, all writes go into this one process, and then batch them up into a nice big chunk, and let's write that to disk, and that gets replicated. So it's quite a key thing. It's not particularly complicated. You can easily achieve similar things just using a gen server, but it kind of handles a lot of the complexity for you. And I just feel like that works really well. So that's a nice little library that anyone can use. It's very generic. But we've got others as well.
Yeah.
So,
I've got a question on the A10 library. So in failure detection, how does it differ from using the kernel app?
Well, normally the heartbeats you do over Erlang distribution are the kind of it takes quite a while to before you kind of disconnect the socket and kind of suspect. So Aten is there to give you a hint that something is not quite right. I mean, it could be an SBI partition. It could be someone is really kind of overloading the Erlang distribution, but at least you get a timely hint to say, well, maybe it's time to do something. And we use it to start the pre-vote phase in the draft implementation. So that's kind of like an advisory election process to see if maybe we should elect a new leader in order to regain availability in Sarah. And that, normally that would only take a few seconds rather than a minute or whatever. You rely on the default timeout for Erlang distribution. Okay. Got a few more people. Does anyone have anything you want to cover? As I said, this is an open session. It's a chat. It's not a talk per se. So happy to talk about any aspects of RabbitMQ. Just say, write a note. Ask a question.
I can see Robert Verding is here. Robert, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. I didn't unmute the computer, and I ran away from it. I am here.
Wrong Robert.
Oh, sorry. There's two Roberts. Sorry.
Hey.
Robert.
Hello, Robert.
I'm a Robert. Hi, Robert.
No, I mean Robert Verding. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Now there's some. So I'm just. We're having a chat with Karl here. So there's he just mentioned this behavior which they just implemented in as part of the RabbitMQ project. I don't know, Karl, can you touch on that? I mean, yesterday on where I listened to Robert talking about how Erlang. Well, there was a question on how could have Erlang been further improved as a language, right? And there are all these cool tools which are available in RabbitMQ. I don't know. I mean, Karl, can you just touch on that gen batch server? And I don't know if it's something that would be worthwhile to even consider being part of OTP. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, it's available as a hex library, so and it's not particularly complex in what it does, but as I've mentioned, it's kind of becoming more central to RabbitMQ because doing things in batches is proving to be a lot more efficient than doing things as in response to each individual message. So it's just a gen type of server that kind of reads as many messages it can off the mailbox, and then when it reaches the empty or some sort of configurable upper limit, it will then call the behavior callback, and your application will do some work on that batch of messages, and that might take some time. And during that time, you might have another batch of messages waiting in your mailbox. And one of the really good improvements to recent versions of OTP is the kind of off-heap messages, because you don't want, when you build a backlog in an Erlang process, you don't particularly want the garbage collector to run over that set of messages and put them on the old heap, because you probably want to, you probably don't, that's probably not the intent. You probably just want to process them and then get rid of it. So that's
I personally, well, okay, I'm very much into keeping the basics very simple. So I see that is definitely something you would want to put in some form of OTP behavior or some special way of doing things like that, rather than baking it into the language or into the lower level for it. That I think. Then I think if you put it into the lower level, you'd have to work out what happens. I mean, if I say I want to receive, say, 10 messages, do I have a set of different patterns that works on them, or well, can naturally be slightly difficult. Does it mean I receive the first 10 which matched any of the patterns, even though it might be the first 10 messages in the message queue, or does it take the number of messages in the message queue or whatever? Right? If we're talking about the number of messages in the message queue, that could just be a very simple little loop which just puts them in a list. Just takes the first 10 messages. And maybe with some form of timeout or something like this for as well.
Okay. Yeah, so probably better
just that
there's an isolated library, something that you can pull and use.
Yeah. So I think you have to, I don't know, I'm very cautious about adding things at the low level in the basic language.
Yeah, I think that's...
And I haven't thought about it, because typically when you add something at that level, it will interfere with other things. Well, it might interfere with other things, right? So you have to work out what happens, how that's going to happen, what does it actually mean, things like this for as well too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Then, and I mean, another thing with with RabbitMQ, I think one thing which I guess the team at VMware, they're always going for is just improving the speed and performance. And and one thing which Karl mentioned just now as well is Erlang as a technology, not being the fastest as well. I mean, in terms of processing at a lower level is, I don't know. I mean, would we still go with Erlang as a language of choice for implementing something that needs to be high performant like Rabbit today? Or
okay, now I feel admitting my knowledge of Rabbit's pretty limited.
Oh, okay. Well, just picture a box that just has to perform very fast, taking messages from one end to the other. Yeah.
I think Erlang does it pretty well with its requirements and what the features it gives you. Right. I mean, it's you could probably do it faster if you wrote it in C or something like this, but then you won't get all the other functionality that Erlang gives you.
Yeah.
That's just the result of what we were trying to what the language we were designing, or what type of problem that was out to solve.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean, for example, processes are isolated, so a process can crash without killing things for other processes. And that's just something we just had to have, right? And that means we don't share things and stuff like that as well.
Okay.
So yeah, that's why the language looks like it does, because we had this set of requirements we were looking at for this particular problem.
So it's also a lot about how you use Erlang OTP to solve problems. I mean, you can certainly go a lot faster than the original Rabbit, because it's kind of, I don't want to be too negative, but it's kind of hampered by the AMQP protocol, because there's a lot of stuff that kind of mandates that you do that is not the fastest way of doing stuff. There are things that they say, and the protocol specifies that you should implement, and which is hard to implement, like things like sharing certain values and stuff like that. So we recently implemented the streams log-based abstraction into RabbitMQ, and a single stream replicated across 3 Erlang nodes on disk, with quorum semantics, 1 million messages per second is quite comfortable to achieve on a reasonable system. So, of small messages, of course. So it's not like you can't do things that are reasonably fast from the outside, even if you don't know it's Erlang on the inside. You certainly can. You just have to design thing in a way that fits the model, rather than a way that's some external specification that maybe is not ideal for the model. So
that's well, you can't really do very much about that. If you've got external recommendations, what the model says, if I have to follow that, I have to follow that. I mean, well, maybe I can try hack it a bit, make it slightly more efficient, but I have to do it if I have to do it. That's nothing more.
Yeah. And you could refuse to do the things that are slow, right? So we don't support those bits.
Yeah, but one thing I don't know, Ayanda, which version of Erlang does Rabbit run on now?
The latest version is 23 and 24.
Okay, so it's got all the good stuff.
We try to keep very at the front. So as soon as there's a new OTP version, we test it immediately. It runs automatically. We test it ahead of time. We test it on our infrastructure, and we were quite keen to grab 24 as early as we could, with the free 20% speed boost or whatever we could get out of queues. It's
I'll also say,
well, good.
As I said, I'm not a Rapid expert in any way, but I mean, what would an alternative language be, and how much problem would it be building the system in that language?
Yeah, I don't know.
And that I don't know, but I mean, that's something you also have to think about. And if I did another language, would I perhaps have more errors? Would it be able to handle things going wrong and stuff like this? I don't know. There's always a trade-off.
Absolutely. It's at least now, yes, we do spend time on performance and reliability, but we also spend time on features, which is relatively easy to implement. So it makes people happy.
Yeah. Okay. And quick question, Robert. The AXD 301 switch that you guys worked on back in the day. I mean, I feel like when I look at a product like RabbitMQ and look at the the products that you guys are working on when Erlang started, I mean, it's similar. I mean, RabbitMQ is essentially like a switch, basically. How performant was that? I mean, I know there was no SMP and all these new features which came up later, but in terms of speed, how performant was that?
I think it was, but I wasn't working on that project, but I think it was performance because it was actually being used. I mean, the system that was being used. I mean, it became outdated when telephony changed, right?
Yeah.
But Ericsson were using it, and if they felt it was too slow, they could have sensibly done something else. I think we've been told by Anisha here that the time is up. But yes.
Oh. Yeah.
That's fine, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Oh well, thank you anyway. Well, don't thank me. Thank and Karl.
God, thank you, everyone.
Thanks everyone for dropping by.